Welcome to Draw Process. I'm Ike. I'm going to draw my comic book, First Sun and Sword. It's page 43 of episode 2 today, and I'll share the techniques I'm using and process about my development in becoming the practice of my art. So here we go. Okay. This should be a little bit slower pace. I think it's 5 times speed, but a little slower than some videos in the penciling part. The inks I sped up more so that I could slow down the pencils more. It should be right at 5 times speed. Okay, so thinking with my pencil. What is happening in this page is the men from earlier that chased them down the street, chased them from the house, have arrived at the point where Sun is fighting those soldiers. And they're on the mission too, to capture him. So they arrive, they're kind of lined up on the street here. I'm going inductive. I'm going with a close-up of them. You should recognize them. You'll know what's happening. I don't need to show the street that they're on. I want to go from that to Farah. She was also pursuing them, and she's going to attack them in this page. So introduce them quickly. Bam, very clear, strong presentation. And then I thought of, how will she engage with them in the fight? And my first idea here was that she's going to hit one of them. And I had to play with the idea of how gory, is this going to be? What and how violent would she be? Would she murder people here? Just kind of the ethics of this world, of these characters. So she hits one in the back of the head with the butt of her sword or dagger. Judo throws another one to the ground, and then throws throwing knives into the other two. And I'm just coming up with this as I go. So here is my first attempt at this. These scribbles indicate her throwing a guy down, and 2 guys turning back and seeing her, and then pursuing her, and then her throwing knives. And you'll see how much work can go into it when I'm still not even sure. But at the same time, they're just simple scribbles. It's easy to start over. So we backed up here. And you're going to see me make several attempts. So one thing I'm considering is that I haven't had an establishing shot yet. Maybe I don't need one. At what point do I? And how much do I need to establish the space? The situation. And what I eventually opted for is this, what I'm drawing here. It's more of a bird's eye view. It's down, looking down somewhat, so that you can see the space and see everyone. You can see the full figure of the most important figures, which is Farah and the man she's throwing down. You get a nice establishing view. There are 4 of these men. So the one she hit in the back of the head, that's that scribble at the top of this panel. That's the man fallen to the ground. I have that coming down right from where the man was getting hit in the prior panel. A very easy movement of the eye flow to that point. And then I'm working out the pose. I thought about looking up reference, but I just kind of stood up out of my chair and did the motion. And I'm like, okay, what is the angle and point at which this would look, high impact, somewhat correct, and so on. So I kept trying, and I worked out the pose in the particular snapshot of that motion that I would want to convey. And then had to think also about the man that's hitting the ground. Has he hit the ground yet? How is he all the way down? What do I do here? I want the action to feel very quick. She's catching them off guard. It needs to feel fast. It needs to feel impactful and surprising. So I'm not showing her grab the guy and then throw him down. I didn't show her sneaking up and then hitting the guy. It's just, there's her head. There's like, really, you just see her hand hitting the guy in the back of the head with a little bit of her face showing in that panel above this one. Not taking the time to establish everything and kind of set it up. If you think about it, I'm still doing that because I established the bad guys, and then her and the action, the next action, the result in the last panel. It's just on a different scale, you could say. This is like, instead of on the scale of each particular movement of one character, it's on the scale of the scene. It's on the scale of all 5 of them. I don't know if that helps you think about that in terms of what do I need to draw in each panel to convey A, B, C, D. It isn't always on the same scale. A, B, C, D could be, sitting in the classroom, walking home, making a snack, being up in your room, and then, and then hanging out with somebody. Like it could be on that scale. So, this last, the bottom left panel, I drew it several times, trying to find just the right angle I wanted her at. I've got her arm, down, going down towards the bottom right, kind of really towards the camera, exaggerated in its foreshortening and how it grows towards the camera, as if there's like a wide angle lens. But this exaggeration also helps it feel more dynamic, more powerful, more expressive, because we're dealing with still images. So if I want it to really, really jump off the page, really feel moving and action oriented, then you might want to exaggerate the perspective. So she's throwing those knives. Back here now, getting the finished pencils. Now it's much easier for me to describe to you like what I was doing, because it's so hard to do when you really may not be able to tell. The pencils are so light at the start. But in my earlier pencils, I laid down a vanishing point and sort of a little bit of a perspective grid to lay out the buildings that are on either side of them on this street. I recall that they've just come down a hill. So the vanishing point, the horizon line that the buildings are going to, is going to be below, the actual street, the actual horizon. I don't know what you call that, but the actual visible horizon, since is looking up a hill, it's going to be higher than the true horizon. So keeping that in mind, the buildings might get a little taller as they move back away from them up the hill. This low angle, so a low angle allows me to just draw a little bit of buildings, but not a lot of people on the street, not all the details of how the buildings touch the ground. That makes it more difficult to draw. But also it allows for this V that pulls your attention to these guys, and it allows for an open, negative, empty space in the middle of that V, the sky, which the color will also help that be like brighter and look like negative, open, empty space. So that helps with a nice balance. It also makes them look a little more intimidating and more interesting when they're not just flat on the page. And again, they're up a hill. As the guys get further from the camera, they're also maybe on a higher plane. That just affects how I draw how tall they look and so on. Most of the people in this world are using very short swords or daggers, except Sword, and that's the idea also, is that he has managed to get his hands on a much, a longer and better weapon than most people have. A kind of an Iron Age weapon in a Bronze Age world kind of thing. Yeah. And now you'll see what I was talking about here. This is a very thin panel. It's not very tall. The reason that I did it in this manner is I needed it to stand out as one like cut in moment. At first, when I was first practicing this, setting up this rough layout, I drew it as a panel on the left, but it really loses its impact when it is set into a row, a tier of panels horizontally. It's just not going to have the same impact. So I want to cut entirely across the page, really pop here. But this action, I was able to find a way to, a camera angle, a positioning of the figures that helps fill the kind of visual space nicely and keep the focus in particular places, in the particular place I want it to be for the flow of the page. And I'm becoming more bold in those choices. As you get better at drawing, better at anatomy, you get more and more confident in more extreme choices of everything, but including where you put the panel border. Like I'm cutting these characters off in the middle of their, like above their lip or just below their upper lip, like not an ideal place to cut the character. But I know I can get away with it. That's the confidence that comes with experience and skill. Yeah. Okay. And yeah, her costume here, her clothing, it's meant to be, in the first comic, she had a different way she wore this like fabric drape. She wore it in a different way, and then this time it's a different way. So the idea is that it's a long fabric that she can just rearrange in different ways, and this is how she chose to do it. Possibly be because it allows her to hide more weapons on her person than how she wore it last time. Just little things like that I consider, and I just felt like changing it up. So this pose, she's not facing the camera, but to throw someone that direction, which I wanted to do, because the first thing you're going to see is her throwing somebody. I want that to be like the first action, the first thing you look at in this panel. The next thing is the two guys she's about to throw knives at, and they're going to be down and to the left, because that's the next panel you're going to, is her throwing the knives, and it's to the left. So I'm bringing your eye down that direction. Instead of bringing your eye down and to the right, I want it to go down and to the left, ready to go to the next row of panels. So she's throwing him to the right, which means coming at him from behind. The way I figured it, she's going to have to use her right hip for the throw and right arm, which means she's facing away. But it makes a nice silhouette. You don't always have to show your characters' faces. That's another thing that you get more comfortable with. This kind of more daring choices, bold choices. Over time, you get more comfortable with that. But you don't have to show your character's face every time. So she's, working out this pose was kind of fun to see how does it look, correct and strong. I kind of like to cartoon, but then I'm always not sure how far I want to go with that. So I don't like to do like speed lines and other lines that convey impact and so on, but I want it to feel impactful. So how I try to kind of blend those things into the environment. So if someone's kicking up dust, which is what I've done here, the idea is that this quick movement kicked up dust. And so there's little clouds forming that kind of show the path of movement of her leg and so on. So that's what I'm doing there. Now, I also had to consider she clearly switched hands with her sword. She's holding this short sword or dagger in her right hand when she hits the guy's head. I needed it to be the right hand, I felt, for the way I wanted that to look in that panel. But then she's got to throw the guy with her right hand, and it might look weird if she's holding the sword in the hand she threw the guy with. You would wonder if she cut him. I just thought it would be more clear to keep the sword out of that interaction. So it's in the other hand. I also needed it in the other hand because she's throwing the knives with her right hand now. She needs her right hand free. And again, I didn't have to show, oh, look, she switched, take a panel to show her switching her hands with the sword. You just do it in between, and it shows just how fast and methodical she is. This is all planned out. And even here, I decided she's not exactly looking at the guys. She's like, it's kind of like she reached down and kind of ducked down to pull them out of where she tucked them into her near her ribs, and threw them out while in kind of a squat or a lunge. And her eye is looking towards them, but she's just using peripheral vision. And again, this conveys speed and skill. That this physicality that I put into how I draw these things it's something that I take interest in, so it attracts me, it keeps my attention, it keeps me engaged. I like it, and I like reading books like that. But it is a matter of style, my personal taste. And some people will like that in a book. But it may be something you want to, aspire to do more of that. But that's something that I do. I really pay attention to the position of everything with these figures. So using her peripheral vision, the way her hand is positioned and fingers are positioned. Now, the way I did this, I liked the drawing. I knew that I wasn't going to have much room for her throwing knives. This long pause here, I'm literally pulling up the comic, going back to when I drew these knives earlier pages. Well, at least you see part of them when they're inside their kind of holder. I wanted to see what they look like real quick. So that's what I'm doing here during this pause. And then I'm just going to draw two of them in the right side of this panel. Now, because there's not much room left on this panel, they get cropped off the panel. I did think that through. The knives are kind of the important thing. And I definitely want you to see the knives and know that she's throwing the knives. But I've used up the space to mostly draw your attention to her hand. And even her eyes are looking towards the hand. And it's more on a third, it's more like central to the composition. So attention goes there. But from there, it's pointing at the knives. And even though they're cropped, I think it works. For one, I feel like because the knives are cropped off, you want to move to the next panel, because that's the important thing. You know what this means. Your mind kind of wants to complete the image, so you're immediately just it hits the panel border, and you'll go on to the next panel and see where they are, and they are in the chests of these two guys. Again, with the real physical expression here that I like to do. So these guys are, they're kind of leaning back. They're throwing up their hands to try to block, but she gets them anyways. And then I toss in the building behind them. Their cloaks, I chose to let those kind of drape around their bodies in the same kind of shape because I'm trying to create a real sense of the shape to the panel, sort of the way the panel looks, and sort of the idea of a gesture, like just a running line that runs through a figure that tells you this is the kind of look and feel of that pose, and then you flesh it out the rest of the way. It's the same thing with a panel. A panel has a particular gesture, a particular dynamic, and I like, I'm using that to guide the eye through to flow, but also to create interest and variety of those shapes, those expressive lines. So I liked the way that felt, so I'd put the cloaks in that fashion. This guy here, he's gonna have blood on his face because he got ran over by the wheel of the cart earlier. So I've got him here, but with blood. And these are the 4 guys we saw earlier at that scene. And I gave that guy, the dead eye and the scar on his face, just to help him look more spooky when he's confronting the children in the home. That's a scary moment for them. I went with this intimidating figure. And it also makes him, stand out, unique. So when he appears here, you know exactly who that is. He's the kind of wavy gray hair and the scar. It makes it obvious who it is, because I want you to connect that. And with the inks, you'll notice that I build out the shadows. Sometimes there's little sketches of shadows. There usually is some rough sketches of shadows on the figures, and then I just try to build those out as I go. Sometimes it's just hatching lines, just parallel lines. Sometimes I do more of a zigzag, and sometimes I draw I forget what that's called off the right at this moment, but the edge where light, where the edge of a cast shadow, that particular outline, that edge where light hits and then doesn't hit because there's a cast shadow there. Sometimes I draw the outline of that, the edge, and that sometimes is helpful to define form. I'm more likely to do it maybe if it's more of the focal point, if I'm going to add more detail. I'm still getting better at inking this way, and I think that I'm going to develop a more consistent style of inking, like a language to how I do things. So if things are, further, let's say here on these buildings in the background, the furthest building has the hatching lines that they're more spaced out than the next building. That the closer things are getting to you, the higher the contrast, the darker they may seem. And the more that I may want to draw your attention to it, make it the focus, then the more these lines can become, tighter, heavier, or even more complex. And even the angle at which I draw the lines, part of it is just what's comfortable for my wrist, so that the mechanics themselves create a consistency. I don't even have to think about it. I don't rotate my paper around. The mechanics of how I have to hold that pen and the angles at which it works best are going to lead to some consistency in how I do it. There's that, and then there's intentional adjustment of the angles, and that's something I'm figuring out too. Right now, I haven't been really, the whole time really, that I've been using this G pen, this nib, which I switched to during this issue. Before that, it was always microns. And in that time, I have not done research on how to use the nib, really. I mean, I think I watched a few videos with tips, but I was finding I get it. I'm just going to go with it. And I haven't really been looking at other people's work in order. I mean, I enjoy reading comics sometimes, but I'm not looking at work to see, well, how do they ink in this style? I'm going to do it their way. I haven't been doing that. It's been more fun for me to just figure out how I like to do it. And I'm figuring something out. It's messy maybe, but it's getting better than it was when it started. But I'm sure over time, I'm going to develop some of my own strategies. I'm also going to pick up things I see. It's just going to happen over time. But if I were too rigid on educating myself on ways to do it and then sticking to it, it might lose the life. To me, the life, the energy, that's more, and in a sense, the consistency is more important, because if I set out to learn, then I would start applying that, and I would try to do that consistently. But it's kind of forced. Maybe, like you're not perfect at that way of doing it yet. You're just trying to do it, and then it won't look as organic, as as natural. So that in itself might make it look wrong at times. So there's a case to be made for going with a more natural approach, like to yourself, and learning more organically, like over time, slower. And the shadows on the ground there, one of them is real. I mean, it's in the environment that the buildings are casting a shadow on the street from where the position of the sun is. I keep that kind of stuff in mind. On the other side, though, I don't know what that shadow is, but it helps that image. It helps there be, the composition and the where your eye's going to go. It helps with that. Yeah. Lately, I've been thinking I need to get back into studying anatomy more, just to help me do a little better. There's things that I know that aren't quite right in my drawings, and every time I experience that, I'm like, okay, maybe it's time to revisit that. And sometimes I just do periodically, but lately I've felt like it's time to do that again a little more frequently. Yeah. Yeah, you'll see how I threw in the buildings. I started with the buildings because I need to work top to bottom, left to right, so that I don't smudge my ink. So I'm starting with that, and I'm just, I don't mind broken lines, so I don't need a broken line being like letting the line, not be completed or have gaps in it. So like on the building, it's not touching his hand. It comes close to that guy's hand in the top left, but it doesn't touch it all the way. Because I embrace that, that's part of how I do it. It's okay for me to draw the background first, even if the figures aren't fully, penciled in carefully. And I'm going to adjust it some because I'm not worried about any little gaps there. And here, yeah, pretty rough pencils, and I'm just trying to figure out where do I want to place these shadows and how many do I place. This is the foreground figure. He's going to have heavier blacks, more details than the guy in the background. And of course, with the capes, I can add a lot of black if I need to. And that's it. I just come in with the brush pen now and add some more blacks to try to create a more complete, finished, balanced composition, panel. So I go through and I thicken lines, I fill in spots, move around the panel until it feels balanced and finished. And in the colors, I get one more chance to do that, but I try to do it now too. There's a lot of jazz in what I do, obviously. But it's, there's principles, there's limitations, there's guides on me. I'm not just hitting whatever note I want. Yeah. Yeah, so down here, the man that she threw down, he's laying there. And that bottom part of the panel is not important. I want the eye, I want the, the interest, the composition, the reader's eye. You're just going from kind of top left, like, or at least to her face there, down her arm to the knives. That's what's important. Her leg, and then the shadow, the lines above her to indicate the shadow on the ground. Those are just there to create negative space to sort of frame in the important part. And you'll notice that just like those hatching lines above her, her leg and the guy's legs down there follow a similar line that frames in the important part in the middle. And here is the finished page. That was over faster than I thought. Today was, as I intended to, a lot of commenting on the actual process I was engaged in, the choices I was making, because I want to go deeper when I can. It's just difficult because these have to be sped up or I could never finish them, the videos. But by being sped up, it's harder to comment on the particular details, the smaller choices I'm making. So I hope someday to do some videos where it's maybe in real time drawing some things, and I'll be able to teach and communicate things a lot better than I can sometimes here. But I hope that was useful to you. The finished page with the colors, the palette, and the style of coloring, I feel like it's really coming together at this point. Her having the gold and the red on her really helps her pop and stand out. But yeah, everything works pretty well. That's it. Be the practice of your art. Find others doing the same. See you next week.